Let's see what I've got in cash, because I didn't bring
Thank
cash.
you.
I don't believe
Not
in
now,
cash.
not now.
This is outrageous. You'll be hearing from my attorney when I get one. I can afford one.
No, what do you use?
Fred is typical. Fred's feeling better, I can tell. He went through a conference for Stanford. Well, Fred was supposed to speak on Bigfoot. And who they bring in to stand board to speak.
They have a lot of weird.
Welcome, everyone, to the National UFO Conference reunion cocktail party and dinner.
Very good. And here we are.
Where are the dancing girls? I want the dancing girls.
Well, that was 35 years ago.
No, it wasn't.
And it wasn't me. Oh, you sure? I'm sure. You're sure.
No, in fact, you were, never mind. I remember one time we were having one of those things in New York, you know, and it ran. Gene and I sat there for 3 days talking through the 1965 version of what we thought was true. Mm-hmm. And we didn't sleep, we just talked. And on the third day, he rose, no, that's a different story. Yeah. On the third day, his father, who was a motorman on the train, I think.
Oh, really? I didn't know.
Knocked on the door. Now, unknown to anybody, my parents were in the next room. Okay, so there's nothing funny here. But he came in, gave me a hard look, gave Gene, you haven't been home in 3 days. I says, 3 days? We've just been sitting here talking for a while. Not a while, Gene. You've been here for 3 days and 3 nights, 72 hours and 44 minutes by my, and he took him home.
I've had witnesses tell me, oh, that object was 40 feet from me and 100 feet long. Wait a minute, that means you have to be looking like this, right? And then I say, what was the apparent size of it? Oh, it's like a quarter. Wait a minute. How can this thing be like a quarter arm's length, be 100 feet long, and 30 feet from me? The details aren't adding up. And what that does is that, to me, really contaminates the database with inaccurate data on it and makes it much more difficult to grab accurate data.
Well, you might want to use a sliding scale.
Mm-hmm.
People use terms like 100 feet
Right.
very, very loosely, and the size of a dime, size of a quarter.
Right.
That was the efforts that came
Mm-hmm.
with that a
Right.
long time.
And we try to do the same thing, yet just for
But
the general public.
If you've ever dealt with accident investigations in the past, you're going to get 7 different views if there's 7 people involved in one way or another. But bottom line, in that case, you have to reach some sort of conclusion as to what happened.
Right.
And it's some sort of composite, and your level of certainty has to be on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 being have no idea, 10 being I'm virtually morally certain that this is what happened. One other thing is your follow-up should include people in the area that you haven't had any reports from. I, on more than one occasion, have investigated an absolutely absurd case on the face of it. And neighbors saw something that was absolutely real.
Alan, can you just talk up a little? I want to record this, so I want to hear both sides of the conversation. Thank you.
Want me to repeat myself?
No. Just speak up a little.
I thought I was being loud. I'm not New Jersey.
No, I hear
Georgia
people are in the back are straining.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
I just said
Alan,
the
at all.
secret of immortality is.
Yes.
I find that often where there is a key, outstanding figure who may be on shaky ground simply because the case is so anomalous.
Right.
That if you check with neighbors and people in the area who have no axe to grind whatsoever, and if they even know of that person, they say, not case. However, out in my backyard, my wife and I saw, and it's a close encounter the second time, you know,
Right.
a very close object. You have enough of those in the area. In my opinion, it reinforces the seemingly absurd case because
And I've had that happen where something that you look at, that you're like, no way, you know, was this guy having a flashback from the 70s or something like that? But then you dig into it and all of a sudden you find out that there's some collaborating witnesses out there who have seen something, maybe a different, slightly different take, but they provide some insight. You've got to look at that extra information out there. The real challenge we've got, though, is just, number one, the caseload we have coming in. That's the problem. The caseload we have coming in is being able to handle and be able to deal with the cases. Where you're getting like 300 cases a year with 13 people. Now you're talking quite a few cases, and that's just in Ohio. I'll let you know, United Kingdom, I don't think they have anybody right now on MUFON. They had 3 people, and I investigated 100 and some cases for them a year ago. Because their investigators, when they looked over the initial report, unless it was like high profile, almost like a Rendlesham, they didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to waste their time. And that was the problem. Let me get David's question.
Okay, I wanted to reinforce Alan. I think he made a terrifically important point on the raccoon case. I do not know whether you intend to publish that, the details of that on the web or not, but I hope very much you will, because I found that vastly more interesting than the unsolved case.
Right.
It seems to me that, okay, I mean, there are solved UFO sightings that are quite banal. Someone doesn't recognize that a star seen through odd atmospheric conditions appears to move.
Right.
That's happened to me also. But this one is a fascinating one, that we know the stimulus, and we know the construction the witness placed on the stimulus, and practically the only detail that survives intact is the 4 legs, which you would think is the last thing a person would notice upon hitting an animal. Why does that detail register? Now, it seems to me that at least when I did ufology many years ago, the things that turned out to have mundane stimuli, we just sort of wrote off. We were interested in the unknowns. But you can learn nothing from the unknowns because all they are is unknowns. And from the case like that raccoon, you can learn.
And there are many cases like that, and they're put in this file called solved, and that's a bogus file. They're not solved as being something other than a conventional object. Yes, you have answered that question, but why a presumably sane human being under what amounts to ordinary circumstances in a normal state of consciousness, or even in a non-normal state of consciousness, conjures up, you know, a demon, so to speak, is worthy of study, and those cases are essentially discards. If you put them all together, they might make some kind of coherent sense. Because the Air Force classified them that way early on, and the private UFO groups
even media
copied their
media now.
Can you give us a little synopsis of that case?
Oh my, I'm trying to remember the details of it. You remember them all, Rick?
Fitzgerald.
It was
Sheffield Lake?
Sheffield Lake. It was involving, this goes back 1950s.
58?
58, roughly thereabouts.
Yeah.
Where,
Then I excuse you guys then.
Yeah. Well, where the woman reported an object by close to train tracks, of which I remember right, the outcome by the Air Force was something related back to a railroad train.
Right. The Air Force, this was right. It was the nickel plate railroad line that was near the lake shore. Sheffield Lake is really close to the lake. She was looking out her front window and saw a rather, I believe it was a disc-shaped object, lighted, and some other structure. It was a very, for the time, a very good close encounter case.
Right.
And you're right. The Air Force
said it was a train.
Said it was, yes, it was. The Air Force said It was a Mars light on a train. Now, a Mars light, being a rail buff,
Yes, yeah.
is a red and white oscillating light. That is used in adjacent with the regular blinding white headlight for visibility. Now they put ditch lights on them and other lights on locomotives, just to deter accidents. And they even, the Air Force, even given the explanation saying it was a train, made the little snide comment, well, the nickel plate has a fast freight called the Flying Saucer. But it was a train. The Flying Saucer was probably the Flying Saucer.
And the Blue Book report, I mean, here's this little card about the size of a card that you would use as a time clock years ago. That was the one main card to use for the report, along with maybe 1 or 2 pages of documents. But here's the investigators locally that had like 30 pages of documentation that was printed and published that they did. And that's excluding all the other research they did behind it. So, I mean, comparing the two on it. Let's get your question, come back up here.
Oh, sorry. So you basically prioritize.
You've got to prioritize, but the bad part is it's when you get so many cases coming in, number one, it's a judgment call based on what the witness report is until you can get the investigator in contact with them, if you can. The bad part we have now is you may try to call the witness up, the witness sees a cell phone number they don't recognize and don't respond back. You leave a voicemail, maybe they will. Emails, I don't know how many emails I've had bounce back. When I was doing the ones over in England, they were actually better in the United States on answering emails. The ones over here, I mean, I could send an email out, it was almost like everybody's antivirus was picking it up. It was never getting through. And it was just losing that contact, and that's just another factor in there that goes into it. But you have to make that judgment call, unfortunately. But yeah, this one looks really good, this one doesn't. And all the MUFON investigators are volunteers. So when I'm driving down to Salt Fork, which I went down there 4 times, that's on my own dime. Paying all the money out of my own pocket for fuel and everything else, all my investigative tools. MUFON didn't buy anything. My computer system at home, I've got 5 monitors up. Oh yeah, you look at my system, it looks like the Starship Enterprise. Because I can have Google Earth here, I can have Stellarium here, I can have another program here. But it really helps track things down faster. But here's several $1,000s out of my own pocket for a hobby.
Now, can you say offhand, after analyzing and researching all these cases, the difference between cases going back to the 1950s and 60s and the cases today? Are there any big differences?
That's a good question. I was
Of course
thinking about
it is.
that on the way in this morning.
Yeah.
Because to me, when you get cases from the 1950s, looking at the data, like in this case in the sky, you had more pure information, I think, back then, because now you've got so many other objects in the sky. How many planes do we have flying around right now? We've got the ISS, we've got all these other things. Back in the 60s, I remember in the newspaper, they published when Echo was coming over.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've got to dig down and do research, and it makes it much more challenging.
Well, now, of course, in the old days, we used to subscribe to several newspaper clipping services. You got a lot more detail to begin with in the newspaper, so you knew where to start your questioning. Today, whatever you see is usually so superficial, you could easily bypass a case that might have some substance to it, just looking at the initial little report maybe that's filed on the National UFO Center.
And some of it's based on the witness report, where the witness says, check out the video, it says everything.
Yeah.
No, the video doesn't say a word. What I really need is your story to support that video on there, to really give me the details.
There's no details. Even if you see an incredible video, there's no way of tracking it down. Nobody ever answers. Everybody's just got some stupid comment to make.
And that's why I've got a friend or actually not a friend, but contact in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
He sends me on an average of 15 different YouTube videos a day on UFOs. Mm-hmm. I delete them when they come in. Because I would rather see something come in direct from a witness rather than say, check out this YouTube video on here.
Does that happen?
I get different people reports that says, check out this YouTube video, it's great. Well, the thing I need behind that, I'm not saying it's not potentially a great video. I would never say that. But the reality is, I need to know exactly where you're located,
Yes.
what direction you're looking,
Yes.
what time of day it was,
Yes.
temperature conditions. I want to know the details behind it, the data.
That's the
Because
great failing with the
you're right.
anonymity of the internet.
And that's why that's one of my pet peeves. But now I do like technology on the flip side though. Because I had a individual turn in a picture of UFOs going across his video frame. He sent me from, he said it was Berea. Wow, where are we at? Berea. And he says, look at it, check this out. And I see a street light, the top of a street light, and I see lights going across, which first impression, Chinese lanterns. Well, I go and I have software that when he sent me his video, I pulled the video up. It told me, because he had made one mistake, he had an iPhone 6 that had GPS in it, and it impregnated the GPS coordinates he was at in the video that he didn't know about.
Mhm.
When you take a digital photograph, it puts metadata information in your photograph. And I pull that out when somebody sends me a photograph right away, if it's available. I pulled it up in there so it showed me not only what type of phone he was using, it showed me the settings. It showed me where he was at, what direction he was looking. And I said, by the way, you weren't in Berea, you were in North Olmsted, and here's the telephone pole you're standing in front of. And from Google Earth, I took the picture of the top of the same phone that was in his video. And it's like, now, what makes you want to what makes me want to believe the rest of your story when you can't tell me where you're at?
And what explanation would they have?
and
They
he had
didn't know where they
he
are.
had no explanation.
Mhm.
He had no explanation other than maybe in his mind he wanted to remain anonymous because he saw something so unusual. In his mind, he didn't want to report it. But there's a whole other psychological scenario for later on.
Well, there's also,
And-
people make huge mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, it's nighttime, yes,
Mhm.
okay. Maybe he doesn't know the area. I don't know
Well, no,
Berea
he
from
was-
a hole in the
he
ground,
was-
but I'm there, you know.
He was 5 miles away from where the video was taken at, but I think what in his case was, more than likely what he was saying, it was his way of remaining anonymous, that he didn't want to let people know that he actually,
Yeah, well, that's
something
not
which
an
is not unusual.
unreasonable thing,
But, you know,
considering the subject matter.
but on the flip side though, I like the idea of being able to extract that information from videos
Oh, yeah,
on there, which is a tremendous aid for me. Because I can go back and I did some of orbs where people sent me pictures of trail cams. I get a lot. I get ones at night. And the people say, look at these orbs floating around. Well, I had 5 pictures come in from southern Ohio. Orbs, orbs, no orbs, no orbs, orbs. When I pulled up the metadata information, flash fired, no flash, no flash, flash. The data right there told me alone, all the photographs in which the flash had fired had orbs. The ones which did not fire, and they were all taken within a minute of each other, a couple minutes, had no orbs. Why? Because the flash is so close to the lens in proximity, it was picking up the dust in the air. That was causing the orbs. Now,
Can you tell a real orb from a dust particle?
that I'm not an expert on. I won't claim to be the expert on that part, but the thing I just had to look at is the immediate data on it. And if there had been another situation where you'd had orbs in every one of them, and the flash had fired and not fired, well then, there goes that whole idea out the window.
There's a whole argument that goes in the 1940s and 50s. There was a lot of new aerial technology, and people were not familiar with it. And I'd like to share just briefly, and I don't know if it will give any help to you or not.
Now,
First,
if you could stand up and maybe.
Yeah. Why don't you stand in front? Yeah, Alan. So, yeah.
I don't like to stand in front, but I'll
You've
stand to
been
the
a bad boy,
side.
you must stand in the corner. And turn around and speak.
Well, what happened? The first thing I saw that could be classified as a UFO, I've never seen what I would classify as a UFO, because, but at this time I was standing in the Atlantic Ocean, probably in 1949 or 50. I was 2 or 3 years old, and a contrail goes over. You didn't see a lot of that. And another kid about my age says, there goes a soul ascending into heaven. And people looked up.
Wow.
That, my friend, in my opinion, is the most significant part of the overall mystery of UFOs. It says what's going on in people's minds at some primal level. Religion plays a lesser role from generation, according to the Pew survey, less every time they do a survey, every 5 years. But there's also considerable scientific evidence that there's something hardwired that could roughly be called the religious DNA in us. And what that kid was interpreting, a then unfamiliar thing in domestic skies, a contrail, may be a clue as to what the unknowns and the knowns are all about. And instead of looking for machines from Aldebaran, we might take a profound interest in what is it that people are striving towards? What is it that people are reaching out towards?
Well, I think I mentioned last night over supper, one of these synchronicities that I found very significant was that June 24th, which is the anniversary of Kenneth Arnold's sighting, 1947.
June 24th, 1909, gleaming object.
Over Mount Rainier, I guess. Anyway, a number of people, including Jackie Gleason, Frank Edwards, publisher, died on that day. I mean, which is a significant day in UFO history. Not on the same year, but that seems to be a reoccurring theme. There must be 4 or 5, maybe 6 people that have passed away on that date. Well, it turns out, I found out through correspondence with one of Kenneth Arnold's daughters, and I had also read this in a newspaper story many, many years ago. Kenneth Arnold did not believe that the craft that he saw were from outer space. He thought that they were some sort of vessels that were taking the souls of the newly departed from this realm over to the next realm. And years ago I did a book called Passport to Heaven, and we had a significant number of cases where people actually say that they met their beloved on board a craft, or they were abducted and they were there in physical form. Of course, the most famous would be Yamsky, which was the case in England. Yeah.
3 days later, Yamsky shows up in England in a classic contact case, not unlike Adamski's orthon.
Right.
Which, if you use the Kabbalistic numerology of it, is the equivalent of...
Anyway, there are many levels to this mystery, right? It's just very many levels to this, yes, and most people just go into it and want to see it from one level. They don't want to see it as an overall...
You don't need experts in one area. You need a whole range of people. Or if not, at least people who are somewhat Renaissance men and women who have their fingers in many different pots and can draw from all of those and not go out expecting to find that this is either a natural phenomenon, and that's the end of it, or this is an unknown and therefore probably a spacecraft from an unknown origin.
Well, that's why I always say we're all, whether we like it or not, we're all in this together, whether it was, ordained or just something that we casually fell into. So outside of Billy Meyer, I try not to mock anybody else.
The challenge is getting the people to work together. Yeah. And like, you've been around this way longer than I have been on there.
Probably longer than you've been on the planet.
That's very possible. But just getting groups to work together and share information.
Boy, that's never worked.
and that's the problem, because it's like, if I know more than you do, you don't know as much as I do.
I put it all out there.
And I've got no problem
after many
with
different
myself.
tries in many different ways, I took advantage of the ARPANET and then
But going into all the other events that like Billy Meyer had, no.
Well, they're made up. That's why you don't have it.
And I'm another one. I'm not when I look at Billy Meyer stuff, I'm like, okay. Okay.
Well, I mean, first of all, they got one of this thing, the wedding cake.
right.
It's sitting on top of the roof of a car. There's two photographs, the one he publishes, and the stuff that the researchers have. One of the trees that he shows this thing circling around doesn't even exist. He moved it, made a little model, and moved a fake tree over there. Anybody who has any rudimental knowledge of photography can look at that in 5 minutes and say this is just total nonsense, and yet people persist in believing it. And the stuff that he tries to push off, he's the only one that's persisting and having these contacts, and they're telling him like he's the only person. Why? And his representatives here are just totally obnoxious. Totally obnoxious,
Myself, I'd rather dedicate my time to something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to pick up on some of the point that Tim made about, was it Frank Edwards? Who was the other one who died on June 20th?
Jackie Gleason,
Jackie Gleason
was one, yeah.
Okay.
And Lyle Stewart, who was Frank Edwards' publisher, yeah.
Okay. Now, if you say, can that be coincidence? The answer has to be yes. There are lots of random coincidences.
Yeah, and I have
But
4 sheets this afternoon that say that there are a lot of them that are not random coincidences.
Exactly. So that, can it be coincidence? Yes.
Yes.
Was it coincidence? That's another question. Is it coincidence that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4th, 1826? Is it coincidence that Barney Hill died almost 5 years, almost to the day, after his experience first?
Well, I say no, because I think we're part of somebody's big cosmic game, and we're existing in a computerized matrix. I mean, that's my, and you can laugh, but that's my theory. Okay, I'm a nutty little guy who's only been doing this for 55 years, and I don't see any evidence of spaceships.
Yeah, but that may be possible. I think there may be more mundane explanations along psychological lines of why certain days are vulnerable days for people to die. Now I'm going to move on to what is sort of related to this, which is if we stop looking at the case, what's reported, and look instead at the witnesses. That very mysterious case you described of the older man and the younger man fishing reminds me very much of Pascagoula, 1973.
It does.
Not in what was experienced,
right,
but in the constellation of the experiencers. Pascagoula baffles me, because they cannot have had the experience they say they do. Even if you think people are being kidnapped by space beings, the space beings that Hickson and the other one, whose name I forget.
Parker.
Parker, yes. That doesn't correspond to anything that anyone else has ever experienced. But I've listened to, as I'm sure many of you have, to the tape of where that when they came to the police station to report it, the police put on a tape recorder unbeknownst to them and expected to hear, "Ha ha ha, we really pulled one over on those cops," and said, "Man, Jesus, you're never going to understand what happened, boy."
And Parker is still doing it.
Yeah.
I saw a recent interview with him. He's still living. And I always thought Parker stayed in the background because maybe it was Hickson's deal. Parker is still terrified.
No, nonsense. And you know why? Because Calvin Parker showed up at one of my conferences, and I was I think it was Phoenix, it might have been San Diego, and he told a totally concocted story about how he was taken into a separate room and had sex with a space woman, and that the aliens were responsible for bringing AIDS to Earth. This is the story that he told in one of my conference.
All those dreams, there
you go. Yeah, I mean, it's just they add to the story as they go along.
Yeah, but that happens with true stories.
Yeah, but you can add a little bit of mystique to your story. I'm sure both of us have been accused of doing that over the years. But to make up something like that, just because maybe there are 75 people in the audience, and he was trying to get a TV show, a series.
Publicity, Jim, because everybody should know this. if you're called upon to produce phenomena on
Yeah.
demand, the temptation, the Uri Gellers, when I worked for the Psychic Friends Network, the temptation to come up with something for people's expectations is so great that the pressure is on to have something to say to the individual who wants to hear it, or the group of people that want to hear it. An expansion of the story is just sort of something that you feel
Yeah.
arm twisted into doing. Parker, in an interview not 2 years ago, had tears in his eyes talking about the same crap, and I'll call it crap that you're talking about, but I think that it is, oh yeah, it's an add-on, but maybe it's dreams that he had later, maybe it's nightmares induced by an initial experience that was so numinous that you have to add on. You could say the same thing about Joseph Smith, and there are millions of Mormons who will dispute that. You could say the same thing about the apostles. You know, as the time went on, the story got more elaborate, and by the time the Gospels were written, there was nobody left alive to contradict it. That's a phenomenon of the human mind, to expand upon and embroider the story, but it doesn't mean there isn't some singular source, some contact with the what's it.
I don't know. If you add on a story,
when it was fresh,
if you add on a story like that, it's taking it to the 10th level. It's just not adding on, to say that there were 6 spacemen in there instead of 4 or 5. It's concocting an entire story. You know whether that's true or not. I mean, I don't think that there's an explanation. You made it up. Yeah.
That's going for the simplest possible explanation.
Not in this case. Yeah, and maybe in some cases, yes. But in something like this, I'm sorry. When you tell me that you had sex with a woman on board a spaceship, when you didn't report it initially, and then you say that she tells you that they were responsible for the AIDS epidemic, no. I don't think it's a dreamlike state. I don't think it's a cosmic consciousness.
You were from Pascagoula, Mississippi in 1973.
I know the story. I have the original painting. I have the original painting that they did under hypnosis. I mean, I'm familiar with the story, and I did invite Calvin Parker, and it's the only public appearance that he's ever made, and I can see why.
Yeah, but that's
Maybe he had no memory of the original experience, or very little of it, and he certainly added on to it when he showed up and gave his workshop and charged, I don't know, $25 or $30. He had a full hour's worth of a story to relate.
Most people charge for what they do.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. Maybe you need to comment. Damn, I'm glad
I
you're
can't
here.
hear you.
Okay, I'm going to get you. Anyway, glad you're here because, man, this is the spark we needed this morning. So we got a slow start, but I've got really 2 questions, or 1 comment. Could you possibly make, speaking of Phyllis, about the cup meeting tonight in details, and you've got the details and I've got the details of everything. Second, you won't believe how many people ask me, if I do a little talk for a little group here and there, about the Trumbull County case. And for some reason or other, people kind of have an inkling of it, but it's a significant thing. Could you give us a synopsis?
I can give you a brief synopsis on there. The Trumbull County case happened in 1994. The date, I say, is approximated December 12th, right around there, because 11th or 12th, because the thing is, there's question about the exact date at that time, because what happened is Kenny Young, who is doing some tremendous work on there, and unfortunately passed away before his time, happened to hear about this case in an area called Liberty, which is down and actually closer to Dayton. Liberty Police Department was the one he was questioning, because there is if I remember correctly, there's a police chief down there who had reported a crashed UFO or a downed UFO. So Kenny Young hears about this. I got to check this out. So he starts tracking it down, and you have to put yourself back to 1994. In 1994, our cell phones didn't have as much capability now that we do right now. So he's trying to track down Liberty Police Department, calls Director of Assistance, and they connect him with Liberty Township Police Department, which is in the opposite corner of the state.
Yeah.
And he says, I'd like to know about this UFO case that was reported down there. Oh yeah, we know about that one. It happened 2 years ago. The date he was looking for wasn't 2 years ago. So when he saw that the dates didn't coincide, a red flag went up right away and said, hey, maybe I got something better yet.
Yeah.
And that's what he stumbled across.
Mm-hmm.
And it took him, if I remember right, about 2 years to recover the 911 tapes. So here this little box shows up. Tapes are wrapped in a box because the original tapes reportedly disappeared. And on the tapes, the opening, a little clipping was in there that said something to the effect of, "You now have the real tapes. Be prepared for something you won't believe." And it was all done in clippings from newspapers, like a kidnapping type thing.
Yeah.
Because the people who put that stuff together, who stored the tapes and put that stuff together, did that as jokes. At least that was the story behind it. He receives the box, he listens to the tapes, he finds out he's got something way bigger. Well, on History Channel they did the segment, and also on UFO Hunters they did one where they went out, they got a hold of the main people involved, and they went through the whole scenario where an individual on a drive called Sampson Drive, which, by the way, Rick, is 2 miles from where I work at. Sampson Drive, a witness reported seeing a greenish type light to 911. He's describing the object there that he's seeing. The 911 operator is this classic. It's kind of like, oh, really? Okay, yeah, just the facts. Okay, let's document it, very matter of fact. But then as the evening progresses, she starts getting more phone calls. And you see her nature changing. Wait a minute, this isn't so funny anymore. She calls up her chief. Chief, there's people reporting out here, stuff. I'll check it out. You want me to call the base? No, don't worry about calling the base. I'll check it out, She goes, no, I'm not kidding you. And the language even starts deteriorating. Her language starts using much more colorful metaphors throughout the conversation. And it even gets to the point that she does call the air base up. She's asking radar if they have anything. They said there's nothing out here for 86 miles, or 60 miles maybe it was. Nothing on the radar whatsoever out there. And she goes, well, I got to come up with some answer. Can you tell me something? And he comes up with some story about maybe there's like a temperature inversion. She goes, that'll work. And that's, and it's just crazy. I mean, an officer does go out. Toby Marrero goes out. Toby Marrero, by the way, is the one who owns the bubblegum machines in my lobby, and I said if he ever comes to the building, kidnap him, bring him back to my office, because I got to talk to that guy. But he was the one who drove down Sampson Drive, and his car engine dies. Stops right there. His car dies. He gets out. An object is above his car, and he's just looking up the thing. And when you hear the details from UFO Hunters, they said he considered drawing his gun. He actually did draw his gun. And he considered taking a shot at it, but thought better. Well, the thing just hovers there and then gradually disappears. But people all over that region had been reported it, and there's, I forget, maybe 7 to 11 different law enforcement groups who also seen the same thing. But when you hear the tapes now, this is where you have to say, some of this may have been paranoia. Because, oh, okay, you're seeing it over here, I'll see it over here. Maybe an officer even makes a joke about it just to kind of keep the things rolling. But to me, it's one of the better 3 cases we've had in Ohio. The other one's being Portage County in 1966, and the other is the coin case back in the 1970s. Those are probably the top 3 cases in the state. And they're tremendous on there. And we want to reopen, by the way, the coin case and do it as a project on it for a group.
That's why, excuse me, but that's why I wanted to come in, because for 30 years I worked for the power company as a troubleshooter. And all this, and it's in the net, about the Cleveland lights, and I was speaking with these gentlemen earlier. We used to go down to the south margin off the shore, we put our big booms in the air and go up there and look. And I saw the one off over there by Channel 8 on the south margin off. and the big military aircraft come down, and it's refueling. And my sister told me in their summer home in Estabula, they live right on the lake, that her housekeeper saw those big planes out on the lake. And here they're having this, I'm not just being a debunker or whatever, I believe in UFOs, but a lot of people are commenting about the Cleveland Lights. And I live by Cleveland Hopkins Airport, and they route their planes over the lake.
I was the one in,
so does Berkeley Front Airport.
I was the one in 2009, 2010 who, again, this is another Christmas card I won't be getting. Because the guy didn't like, it was actually a young gentleman over in Euclid who reported seeing lights like 9 days in a row. And this is where you just can't talk to him, you talk to other people around him. And I found out that he just moved into an apartment a couple months beforehand overlooking the lake. He'd moved from a ranch house. He was also trying to get into theater at that point because I found his name on Playhouse Square, trying to be getting the small acting jobs. But the biggest thing is he was seeing aircraft. And I nailed it 20 different ways. I talked to pilots from altitude, airspeed that they were coming in at.
Isn't it interesting, though, that people get angry about that?
Oh.
I mean, if you make them out to be stupid, I could understand it. But if you say, sir, my considered opinion, well, at one time I did an experiment, twice actually, where I conducted on an arbitrary day from the UFO office that my father was kind enough to pay for several years, a citywide Atlanta area, well, it was considerably smaller than it is now, UFO Skywatch, which I announced in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is the paper there.
Cover Dixie like the Duke.
We don't say that anymore. And my theory was that if you call a citywide Skywatch, if UFOs have something to do with the relationship with human beings and the environment in some ill-defined but interesting way, there will be reports on those nights, lots of them, simply because I put a little classified ad, 10 or 12 words saying, UFO Skywatch citywide, call this number. If not, then I would get few calls, and they would mostly be, ha-ha calls.
Right.
I got a few ha-ha calls, but I got hundreds of calls that overwhelmed the phones. One guy, some of them were good sightings in the traditional sense of what we define as good sightings. Close-up objects hovering at, treetop level, is the usual way they or give us number of feet, or at the level of, and it happens that on one occasion, and I was very polite with these people. I have Southern manners because people don't really understand Southern manners. It doesn't matter whether you're mad or not. Unless you're ready to duel, you keep the manners on. And the more angry you are, the heavier the manners get. So for something like this, I had this very neutral voice, but sometimes people would ask me, what do you think that was? And a guy calls me up, and he describes Venus, or I don't even remember if this was in the 1960s. And I told him, sir, with all due respect, what you're describing at that particular location, at that particular time tonight, you can still see it, it hasn't said yet, is the planet Venus. Pause. I'm a veteran.
Yes.
And it's funny, but at the same time, it shows that the man had invested something of himself, so that as polite as I was, this was him and the infinite.
I'm a veteran.
Coming into contact.
I was in the Air Force. Well, what was your job in the Air Force? Well, I refueled planes. Okay.
But that's not the point. I mean, the point is that the man responded with indignation.
Right.
Yes, and like I had said, you are a coward and an evil person because you have misidentified something, so you're an adult. So he responded with his greatest credit in life, the thing that he was most proud of. This was Vietnam era, so he had probably served in Vietnam, although I didn't get any more information. I'm a veteran, as if that were rebuttal. Or why are you calling me a fool and a bad person? Don't you understand that I saw something that gave me a glimpse of the infinite?
Right. And you're right, David. I tell my investigators that you have to also have a thick skin being an investigator. Because you're going to hit the point where you're going to have, you can be the Southern gentleman, you can present.
I wasn't insulted.
And you can present details, but it's that indignation that they run into that you're debunking me. No, I'm not debunking you, I'm just presenting facts. I even was down on the lake with my iPad, pulling up Flight Aware, where these two young kids were down there with me. I was doing part of the investigation. This guy had seen the objects 8 days in a row. Now, if you see objects 8 days in a row in the same area of the sky, it kind of makes you think maybe there's a natural explanation. So I'm down there 8 days in a row in March, freezing my little nanas off down there, because it was cold down there in March on the lake. And two kids are down there saying, "Are you a reporter?" "No." Like cameras set up all over the place. They go, "You look like a reporter." "No, I'm not a reporter." "You think we're going to see a flying saucer?" And I had my pad out and I could see, it was like at that time a United Airlines flight coming in from Minneapolis, St. Paul. I go, "About 2 minutes, I bet you're going to see one right out there." This light pops up in 2 minutes and these kids are like, "How did you know that?" And they didn't know what I was looking at on my pad.
Yeah.
And what happened too is you'd have one flight coming in after another one. And if you've ever been like in an airport like O'Hare, where they're stacked up one after the other one, it makes this gyration around them. And the witness, again, couldn't even listen to what he was saying. Even on the news broadcast, he says, "I can't understand why they always turn to the southwest." Because that was the final approach for Hopkins. Every one of them, he would not listen to himself. But when I brought it up, and they said, "Well, here's the thing you did." I was out there, I said, I got an angle above the horizon. I could see the lights coming and turning at a point. I contacted a pilot from Delta. I said, "Where do you turn at on your final approach?" He goes, "Well, we head towards Euclid," which is where I was at. We make a turn heading back in. I said, "What's your altitude?" He goes, "Well, I'm at 5,000 feet heading at 200 knots. Took that 5,000 feet, my angle above the horizon, it trigged out to be 11 miles out. 11 miles is where he said basically where they were turning at. It matched there. I had my group in Euclid, I had another group in Lakewood. They're watching the lights go across the sky this way, dim. They would be bright towards me. Then I'd say, when I call you, let me know what happens. But when the lights started dimming towards me and they started heading to southwest, I called them and said, "Well, what's up?" "Oh, the lights are getting bright now." And they could see the aircraft coming in. We had this thing 20 different ways, but this kid goes, "You're crazy. You should have taken an airplane out and gone out there and investigated in an airplane or helicopter." I said, "But here's the reality." As argumentative as he was, I said, I could have gone out there, splattered on the windscreen of that United Airlines plane, and your comeback would have been, "Oh, that just happened to be a random plane that flew through the area." It's a no-win situation. And I wrote a whole story on this one, by the way, about his comments saying you have to know when it's time to move on. Because you're never going to win that argument out there. And you won't. And you mentioned on there about the meeting tonight.
Yeah, I mean,
Just want to mention that I'm from the Cleveland Ufology Project, too, as co-director of Aaron Clark. We're having a meeting tonight at Tri-C West, if anybody's interested in coming out on here. Phyllis Budding, who's going to be here later, is going to be out there tonight.
okay,
And she's going to be expanding more tonight out there then.
okay.
But it's a very nice location out Tri-C West. We have monthly meetings out there if you're interested. And I can always get you the contact information if you want to attend.
Yeah, I've got it too. I've got,
And-
well, I mean, for the
Right.
directions tonight.
And we always vary the topics each month. We rotate it around. We touch on a little bit of everything because who knows the relationship of all this stuff, how it comes together for sure, you know. There's so many different fields out there. And I'm just very open-minded. Somebody says, "You know where they come from?" No. Don't have the answer.
When do you have people that screen your reports that come into you?
Well,
Let me ask you a
yeah,
couple of questions.
no, I'm very, very honest when people ask me about the organizations I'm with, and I don't lie. I got into it the other day on the phone with one of the people in our media. And I said, you know, when a phone call comes into MUFON, it goes into our national database, which is in California. What they do is they've got people who go back and they glean those off and say, this one's Ohio, send it to Ohio. This one's California, goes to California. They send it back to the States. But my first thing is, if you have somebody separating those out to begin with without a computer doing it automatically with no human intervention, how do you know something isn't gleaned off at some point?
Well, this is what I'm, and then, now, the reports that come into you, do you find yourself, without reports coming to you, that you find yourself, maybe you, on your own, you're finding out something else and you go investigate? And Alan was talking about people that might have, like the neighbors that have no, they don't have any interest in what the other person was saying. Do you find yourself being unwelcome at times when you present yourself?
You can find yourself being kind of shut down because you may have neighbors that don't care for the neighbor next door. You may have people that say, I don't want to talk about anything like that, you know, maybe because of personal beliefs, whatever.
Now, when you, like you were talking about those two guys that were down at Salt Fork, did they ask you to come to talk to them? Did you go down, or you just went down
They
there?
filed the report with our national headquarters. Headquarters gave me their phone numbers, and I contacted them. And one of the things I told them I want to do is I want to take you back down, basically to me like the Lion's Den. We're going to right back to the Lion's Den right now.
Okay.
I want to see the reactions. I want to see everything as immediate as I can. Also, I'm not giving them time. If somebody's going to fabricate something, the less time they have, they're not going to get a chance to maybe fabricate as much stuff or forget stuff that's going to be fresh in their mind. And they went down without hesitation on there. I was very impressed with the gentlemen down there because of how forthcoming they appeared. And then this is where you start reaching out in other areas, because I went down and visited them at their house, which is down in the Barberton area. And the week after it happened, the 42-year-old and his wife, the 19-year-old, who's the boyfriend of the guy's daughter, were all sleeping in the living room at night because they were too terrified to go outside. They were too scared. They said, we won't go outside. They didn't work for 3 days because they didn't know how to, I mean, he owns his own business even, construction. He says, I couldn't go into work for 3 days. A week later, he's still upset. A couple weeks later, still upset. And you can see a lot of body language on him. And then this is where you reach out into some of the other things. I said, you know, sometimes I have unusual feelings myself because I don't want to say I'm psychic. I have no claims of being psychic. But
Oh, go ahead and say it.
I'm psychic, damn it. No, but sometimes I've had sensations.
Yeah.
And I've talked to Phyllis about these. And some goes back to, I mean, we've all heard about the remote viewing and all these other things. Who knows how much power the human mind really has? Who knows how much? When I was down there at the state park, I went back down the following weekend at 3 in the morning by myself, walking around the state park. It doesn't bother me. The one night I was down there with the 19-year-old on the original report, though, he's bouncing all over the walls. I mean, just so nervous. One time I called an energy off in one direction. He reacted, and I felt something out there. I said, it feels like something's out there. It was just like 5 seconds going. Didn't happen. Following weekend when I went down, I'm walking all around the park, and it was like a U-shaped area they were at. They were over here. I checked the instruments, everything I had. I couldn't detect anything, any residual energy of any sort down there. I'm walking over this other big clearing on the other side. And here I'm in front of this tree, completely dark, like 4 in the morning. I've got tri-field meters and stuff out I'm looking at just for curiosity, see if there's anything on those. And I'm looking at the meter, all of a sudden I'm like, son of a bitch. I'm feeling something right here. And I looked down, I was standing in a complete spot of dead grass. Circular shape, and I'm dead center in the bullseye of it. And that was the only patch I found in that whole area. And I took samples I've got for Phyllis. But I'm like, I don't know what it was, but again, I felt an energy, but it lasted for about a minute. A sensation was going over me. I said, something was here. I don't know what. But that state park's also got other paranormal things down there going on. And when I was at his house, I felt something really unusual. And I said, I have a question for you. Do you have any Indian mounds around here? He goes, right across the street. They were on their road was a little small country road that came back. They're on one side. He owned 55 acres. The other side of the road was Indian mounds. And I just had a sensation there was something like that there in the region. I've also had, and this is a really wild one, I wrote an article about how at times I think investigators in this field may actually have a close connection back to this for another reason. That maybe we've had our own experiences at some point. And I kind of call it like a moth being drawn back to a flame. That you keep coming back for some reason, like a bug zapper, you know? Well, I did an investigation long distance out of Puerto Rico, where the witness from Puerto Rico called MUFON up. They had no investigators. So they said, would you reach out and call the witness up and talk to her and get her story? I called her up, and she's just describing a UFO following her mom down the road, which she doesn't believe. Mom pulls in the drive. Mom says the UFO follows her, and the daughter doesn't believe her. The daughter goes out. Mom pulls out in the car, goes down the road. UFO actually follows her down the road. And the daughter's kind of blown away by this. So the daughter files a report. As we're talking, this is where the whole story takes another turn. She pauses for a little bit and she's thinking. You can just hear silence on the other end before she says another word. I'm sitting at my desk in my office on there and I'm making notes. All of a sudden I see a vision in my mind of somebody sitting in a dark room, and I'm that person like looking in a dark room looking towards windows. I see windows going all across the far side of the room, and I'm not making this up, it's a good story though. But I'm seeing these windows go all the way across the room. I'm sitting in a dark room, and all of a sudden I see this shadowy figure on the other side of the room. Shorter than room height, and also short in stature figure. And she says, well, me and my mother have also had some other things over the years too I want to talk to you about. I go, well, tell me what I'm on here. Go ahead. She goes, well, one night I was sitting in my living room. I said, describe your living room. She goes, well, I was looking towards the windows in my living room. And I said, what type of windows? Well, they stretch all the way across the wall. And I said, tell me more. And she goes, well, the night light was coming. It was like ambient night light, which I'd seen. And she goes, I'm looking at these windows and I can't believe I'm seeing a figure standing directly in front of the windows. And I said, really? Tell me more about that figure. She goes, well, it was a short little any day. Couldn't make any characteristics. I was just kind of outlined in the night sky, you know. Okay, so you can picture me, Rick. Now I'm trying to figure out, okay, let's get as much detail as we can. Finally, after about 20 minutes, she goes, well, I said, describe your room to me, how it's physically laid out, you know. She goes, well, where I was at, you walk out and you step down to a lower section of the living room because it's sunken. And right there I'm going, damn, did I nail that one? I don't know how, but the shorter figure in stature I saw was actually sunk in the sunken living room at a lower level. And I saw it in my mind before she ever uttered one word about describing the whole thing. So at times I think maybe some of us have connections back based on maybe prior experiences of some sort on there, you know.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Commenting on that on Puerto Rico, one, all the houses are built on slabs, so there is no step down. Two, the people are very superstitious on
She
the
was in
island.
she wasn't in a flat house.
Okay, when you were talking Puerto Rico. And then over there, last year, well, changing to 2015, they discovered Chinese lanterns. So everybody was sending them up. Well, now they got a suit on anybody in the cities sending them up. They're going to get a lawsuit on them. Another thing, with people seeing things flying around over there, the government has a lot of naval bases over there, and they're flying drones all over the place over there.
Yeah, and it's a possibility. You can't.
And because I know, and a third thing is, about a MUFON
But
investigator.
here's my question, though.
They had,
How did I see that in my mind before she ever said a word?
Yeah. Well,
Answer that one.
yeah. The human condition. How's that?
The human
Okay, you want to
condition.
get with the spiritistas
But
over
how,
there?
how could I visualize everything without leading her in any way?
Well, I don't know that question, but another thing over there is, you said that MUFON didn't have investigator over there. In May, they had that guy on Coast to Coast that he's leading that big UFO investigation over there in Puerto Rico.
They're not always here, but they may
Well,
find
he's not
people
Puerto
down
Rican, he's an American guy over
Right.
there, yeah.
But they may have people go down.
Yeah,
But
because
I
he
was
said he
getting
was
assigned-
back and he was going back.
But I was getting
to-
assigned cases because they didn't have them.
Oh,
England had 3 people until they all basically quit.
yeah,
Canada, until 2 years ago, had really only a handful of people for the whole country.
yeah. 'Cause
Well,
the
now, are you
Canadian
just talking
is-
about MUFON people?
Yeah,
Because
MUFON
there are
people.
Canadian
Yeah.
UFO
Yeah.
researchers
But
of somewhat
they're a little
caliber.
bit, I think it was the group that's like French or something like that, gets a little bit
Oh.
separate from the MUFON. They don't get involved.
I
with
know
it.
there are UFO researchers all over the world, and certainly England has a huge number.
But for some reason, with MUFON, they're just not.
And in
And then they were
Mexico,
looking
it's
for the
that
big
Jamie
things.
Moussan.
Hmm?
And in Mexico, it's that Jamie Moussan.
Jaime Moussan, yeah,
Jaime
well, yeah.
Moussan.
Why wouldn't send him out to investigate it?
Yeah, well, they just had that big thing with that.
Yeah, yeah. Unless there's a little alien involved.
That's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
one,
yeah.
yeah.
Aggregation in the world, but
That big hoax.
I went to college, I was going to college then, started out college, and we really didn't get together that often and do that much sky watching because I was too busy trying to...
What years was this?
1966,
Mhm.
in the fall. So there was nothing more done in the area. But one interesting thing did happen. Back at the 2002 National Convention down in Cincinnati, Kenny Young was one of the sponsors, Donnie Blessing and Kenny Young. I talked to a woman who lived in the West 117th and Lorraine area, okay, which was just right close by. And she was telling me, we used to, when she was a kid, they used to see stuff in the sky and that. She said, there was this old neighbor of mine that used to talk about abduction. And this happened back in the 1920s. So there was this talk about some sort of strange, being abducted by some strange, weird thing. The neighbor never really said that much about it. But, and here I am, it means absolutely nothing, just this anecdotal little comment from somebody from the old neighborhood. But apparently, maybe some strange things were going on. And this was right in the West 117th and Lorraine area, just a stone's throw away from where the Skywatchers are. So there you have a window area. Just threw this out for you, a little bit of ancient history, but it's a little Cleveland history. So that's it.
Is there any windows now in the area?
No one's been back. I moved out of the area. I kind of lost contact with Dave, the fellow whose house it was we were at. I was busy with college and then working. Eddie Beeble went to college and went to law school for a while. We never, although we would see each other, socially every now and then, no, we never did any more sky watching. I always wanted to go back. I always wanted to try it again. And as a matter of fact, back in the early 1970s, I was really trying to get something put together to head back over there, but it never really panned out. But
How far was that from here? From Cleveland?
7 miles,
10 minutes,
maybe
maybe.
7 miles,
Mhm.
basically north of here. In the heart of the west side of Cleveland. Yeah. Okay.
But there were other anomalous phenomena as well as UFOs?
Not that I'm really aware of.
Mhm.
Although a friend of mine who recently passed away worked for the East Ohio Gas Company, one of the major local suppliers. And he was talking to a homeowner in the general neighborhood, in the old neighborhood. And they would do like inspections, emergency calls, heater, furnace out, problem, hot water tank not working. And they would try their best to light it or check it out, and if it was dangerous, they'd have to shut the gas off or shut the gas off and refer them to repair it, you know, gas leaks, whatever. But he was down in the basement in that neighborhood, and the homeowner was just talking and saying, oh, I used to have a buddy that lived in this neighborhood, me, and just stuff like that, and they just got to talking about it. It was something, UFOs, stuff like that. This was, oh, really interesting. Well, the homeowner had a number of haunting incidents, so possibly. Back in the day, I wasn't one of the ghost chaser plumbers.
Yeah, yeah.
So you know, I didn't really, you know, look for that. But it's rather. I mean, is it just because we were persistent that we would show up at this one particular house? If we would have gone to a house maybe 15 blocks later, or further west or east or south or whatever, would the same thing have happened? I don't know, because we never tried it. We did, however, with the October 9th case from '65, where the big lighted disc was seen. Yeah, it was seen all over the west side of Cleveland, and from that location too. But does that qualify as a window? I don't know. Is it coincidence? It very well could be. Maybe, but we were never able to do any follow-up on it. So, just some anecdotal stuff. That's all.
Maybe we have to work in reverse format and ask people who have hauntings whether they have UFO experiences.
Well, I think Keel did that too.
Yeah.
Keel did that too, and in many instances, yes, they would have some paranormal experiences. And sometimes, if I'm not mistaken, immediately after.
Yeah, well, I have visited. You're more likely to find out details when you go to a small, very rural area. You couldn't do it in the city or metropolitan area.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't quite work. But now I remember a year or so ago, I was on Coast to Coast, and I talked about this area in Massachusetts that had it was a road where they had like the ghost lights, and it's supposed to be a crazy witch or something that lived there 100 years ago. All right, so I went with my psychic friend Maria DeAndrea, and we found the road okay. But when we asked people whether they knew anything about this urban legend about the witch, two people at least, well, we only talked to three, I think, but two people at least said, no, I only vaguely heard of it, or it was like something the kids used to like frighten their girlfriends or something when they were young. But both of them said, but I got this strange stuff that's going on in my house. And this one guy said, it's like the Exorcist or something. The stuff is falling off the bookcase and this and that and the other thing. And then he disappeared. He didn't seem to want to talk about it at any length. But maybe this is going on a lot more than we realize, and people are just not talking about it.
Well, in rural areas, just one thing, and I'll because we when I was in high school and later, we had a cottage at this Pymatooning Lake, which is basically the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, in the northern part of the state of Ohio. And I was a CB fan still then, and spend my summers out there. And we installed an antenna on the side of the cottage, and I would bring one of the units out and plug it in and talk. And one night got talking about UFOs to somebody, and I've seen stuff, and you'd be surprised how many people heard it, broke in on the conversation, and started telling us about their sightings. And this was in an area, probably in the area, trying to think, probably people within a 10-mile radius where I was reporting in. So, yeah, there was a lot of activity. I know that particular location, my grandmother saw some orb-like things back before they were fashionable. She called them like balls of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And she had insomnia, and she would just sit up, and she saw out of the window several times this ball going right by the house, heading towards the cottage behind us, going that way. Well, another night she would see it going the other way. And so I was kind of interested in that, and seeing that thing myself, but I never could wake up. I had grandmother, I told her and told my mom, if she sees something like that, you know, wake me up. So she tried to wake me up one night, and I wouldn't wake up and sleep. You know. But there were a lot of strange reports in that area too. So.
Why do you feel that you've been pulled into this field and have lasted so many years? And do you see anything significance behind it, or?
I don't know. It's always fascinated me on some level. I always thought I never thought it was nonsense. I always took the subject seriously. And quite frankly, there's this, Alan Greenfield could probably talk about this better than I could, but I felt this sense of, I refer to it as a sense of wonder, dreaming, and awe at the whole phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And that's what I feel to this day, still, or else I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now and batting my head against the stone wall, trying to keep the print publication alive.
Indeed.
That's why I did it.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't question the truth of what you say, that Almanac ran those classified ads and they got results. What I'm having a little trouble envisioning is exactly how that worked. Because presumably if I'm reading the classified ads...
Oh, no, no. Actually, what Al did was he had some flyers printed up on cardstock, large cardstock. And the ads were just an ancillary sort of thing that we did, just for the heck of it. He personally, and I helped him on this, we took them to the Cleveland Press, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, to the city desks, and handed them to him. You know, here we are. We did a newsletter back at the time, in the 60s, a little newsletter, and I did some of my stuff. We could pass out some of our stuff. We're not just nuts on the street. This is a group we meet at the Central YMCA. And we have this hotline. Could you post it, and if you get something, they didn't know who to refer people to. They would say, call the Air Force, call the airport. But now we got into the act, and we were proactive, and we started posting these things. We went to then Cleveland had 3 TV stations. We went to all those 3 TV stations in person, handed them to somebody could get them to the general manager or whatever, get them to the news desk. And a lot of the radio stations, couldn't hit all the radio stations, a gazillion of them. We hit all the major radio stations. The most help of all was, it was then called KYW, later WKYC. They had the ufology roundtable program on. And you remember listening to that, I know you talked on the radio about it. It was like Thursdays from 8 till whatever, 8 to midnight, or I can't even remember anymore. And they had Earl Neff would be on there quite frequently. I was on there, Al Manning, whoever was guest. Kehoe was on there. It was a great talk radio. I think it was in its heyday back then. It was very exciting times. And they gave us a lot of publicity too. And
that was when, you know,
Earl always
back in those days. If you were on a show, I remember the first time I was on Long John, and I told people to write in if they had a sighting or a report or something. Next time I went up there and I asked them, "Did you get any mail?" They opened the bottom of the drawer and it was full, like maybe 400. But today you go on a show, you're lucky if you get 2 responses or something.
Yeah. Well, that was true. Yeah. We a number of times we sponsored Kehoe coming in 1964. I think Frank Edwards in 1965. We had Professor Charles Maney in once or twice. We had Maney in twice. And we would hold these at the Lakewood Civic Auditorium, which is a big auditorium in a western suburb of Cleveland, a great big suburb, huge auditorium. And we would get 900 people coming to these things, and we would publicize them.
Well, the first the time I came down for this group, which was maybe the second year,
Yeah.
there were a couple of those meetings that had 300-400
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Was it the Parma High School or?
The second was in '65. It was Valley Forge. No, that's the high school. Pleasant Valley Junior High School.
Yeah.
And that I showed a photo you were speaking.
Oh, is that where that was
That's where
from?
that
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
And we had, God, I don't remember the count. Yeah, but there was a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. There was about
A lot of
400 people at one of those.
Probably. And then we used to hold them at Valley Forge High School and '66 and a few other years. We got good crowds. But we used to get hundreds and hundreds of people to these couple of
Coming back to these hotlines, so the way it would normally work would be, I see something in the sky I can't identify. I phone the radio station.
Yeah.
They've got your number on
Right,
hand,
right on the wall.
automatics, and they'll give you that. Were the police cooperative in that way?
No. No, they were not.
Because I would think that they would really need, that would be a godsend for them.
Back in those days, the police really, they would say, "Oh, call the airport," or, you know, like.
Now,
call
didn't
the
Len
Air Force.
Stringfield? Did he have the police? Because I do know
Yes,
that.
no, he
yeah.
had a deal with some of
Yeah.
the local police, maybe more than, maybe local law enforcement agents. I can't. This is going back to the '50s. He wrote a book called Inside South
Yeah,
Coast
that's
30
right.
Blue.
Yeah, yeah.
Or
Because
maybe
now-
it was even a military. I don't know.
Peter Davenport. Now his number is one that's been left all over the
Yeah.
place, 800 number or
Yeah.
something like that, and I think that's the one that people are still referred to if they call the Air Force
he gets
Base.
a lot of
calls, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, this was just strictly locally, and it worked for us. And over the years, it always worked for us because even after Cleveland Ufology Project, back in the '80s, we had another Northern Ohio UFO group, and we had a hotline too for several years in a row. This one we put advertised in the phone book, paid a fee, put it in the phone book or whatever, and did the same thing.
And how would people find that I see something in the sky? What do I look at in the phone book?
UFO?
Under UFO.
So that it would be under UFO.
It said UFO Report Center.
Now in New York, you had saucer news, but then you'd have to know how to look under, looking under saucer. And then the one that everybody called was Jim Rigberg
Flying
because of
Saucer
Saucer
News.
News.
Flying Saucer News.
Flying Saucer News bookstore, and he actually had it in bold. And he got quite a few calls, but my God, he didn't know what to do with it.
No. He was quite
Poor
bad.
Jay. Yeah. Well, that was you were with us the night we went over to his bookstore on New Year's Eve, right at midnight, or he opened at 9, and he was afraid of getting mugged, and he had been mugged a couple of times, and
He was quite a care. I bought a lot of stuff from him.
Yeah.
Nice guy.
He sold the same books for years, though.
Well,
Flying round trip to hell in a flying saucer.
but he had some of the classics.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he was about the only place for a while there in New York that you could get it. Yeah, get any books.
Right.
Well, I volunteer to go next unless somebody.
Just one thing.
We had,
Yeah.
You mentioned about Frank Edwards.
Yes.
One thing good about YouTube, Frank Edwards' talk at Lakewood is actually on.
Oh,
YouTube.
really? Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I don't. Maybe it was Wendy Connors or whatever. Somewhere there was a case in early 1967, Perkins Township. I'm trying to think of the sheriff, Sheriff Gary Butler, out near the Plum Brook Atomic Station. And we investigated. Earl and I went out and investigated that. And somehow I had my tape recorder, and Earl and I were asking him questions. We sent the report on to NICAP. I don't know how the tape survived or how Earl got it or who got it, but it's on there. And I heard myself and Earl way back. There's all this amazing stuff on there. It must have been. I gave my stuff to Wendy Connors, a lot of my stuff, but I didn't have this. I'd forgotten it existed. I was David's going on.
Oh, okay.
I'm only going to speak for a few minutes.
No, okay.
Delay you. Yeah. I think for me it's this is kind of a trip down memory lane. I remember that I'd forgotten that our 1964 Congress was the first non-contactee UFO Congress. And I remember how excited I was as it drew near. I was at the time in 11th grade, and I'd been corresponding with Rick, with the late Dale Redding, I think also with you, Alan, and Tim. I think you I think were the only one that I'd met face to face.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that I had the sense that I was part of the, we didn't use the word yet, invisible college of...
Or at least invisible high school in our case.
It was
right.
a college in the sense of a
Yes,
group
yes.
of colleagues who that we had turned away from the heedless high school entertainments of dates and parties and dances to give ourselves over to the pursuit of truth. I mean, it was sometime later that I actually got up the nerve to ask a girl out on a date and started getting invited to parties, and I found out that that wasn't such bad stuff either.
Yeah.
But for a few years, I was part of this invisible college. Again, most of you here are, not all of you, most of you here are close to my age, so you can probably remember how exciting the mailbox was in those days. Nowadays, it's just you get junk, you get bills. If you've ordered magazines, the magazines...
You're lucky if they're still in business that you get them. So.
Right, the magazines come in. But back then, especially for kind of socially fringy people like me, the mailbox was where you got the exciting contact with the great world out there, notably the invisible college. And for that, I think, as anyone who's part of it remembers, it was almost exclusively male. Mm-hmm. That the gender ratio in this room does not surprise me in the least. I'm not sure why it was the case, but it was boys, teenage boys, who were into ufology. The girls, I don't know, they were, I don't know, they were into other things. I remember, I think you spoke, Rick, about a meeting at Dale's house in 1963.
64, yeah.
February. Yeah, because I remember that, and you remarked on how long-distance telephone calls were not the humdrum routine. And I remember how I got change for $3 or $4 and a whole stack of quarters, and walked down to the Levittown shopping center. I could not have phoned you from home, or my father would have hit the ceiling. but I remember standing...
Well, I had to pay my mother in advance for the call, so...
I did what you did. After I got a bunch of bills in, my dad hit the roof. Yep.
I was standing in that frigid phone booth for the privilege of 3 minutes talk with the real ufologist.
And now, isn't it funny when you could call all day for nothing, nobody ever telephones each other?
Right. It was a different world. Yeah. And I remember how eagerly I looked forward to actually meeting these people face to face. And I remember that in our school they showed a film of some of the great physicists or something around the year 1900, and they had sort of dramatized scenes, and you saw these people coming to a meeting, and these people with mutton chop whiskers, and they were shaking, great to meet you, and so forth, and I thought, that's what's going to happen. And I went to Cleveland, and yeah, sure enough, it was. And it was really fun. Now, I asked people last night about whether teen ufology still exists, and the overwhelming answer I got was no. which I had heard earlier from Jerry Clark.
Well, but do we actually know the age of the people that we're corresponding with? Like, I mean, I don't get hardly as many sightings or reports or anything, but I don't often ask the people who are buying my books or something, how old are you? They do seem to run the gamut from some teenagers. The podcasts the people that are running the podcast seem to be fairly young.
Okay, so maybe that's the equivalent. Are they mostly male nowadays too?
Not quite as much, maybe, but to some degree. Of course, now maybe that was just this group though, because certainly a lot of places around the country that I had lectured, at least in the audience, there were any number of females. I met any number of girlfriends over the years at different meetings and things like that. So they were there, and some of them are now involved in MUFON as state directors and things along that line. I don't know as if anybody ever takes a survey or a poll on any of this. I mean, that's one of the things we really don't know. And, you talk about groups. Well, now there are groups all over the place. I know from Facebook, because I belong to about 150 of them, because I post everything that I think they might be interested on there. And there are groups. I'm having a guy on next week, I think, on my podcast. He runs some group in St. Louis. Never knew he existed until he started sending me some information. And also, there are groups and there are people out there doing this thing. We've just become disconnected.
In that, was there more of a connection when it was just on letters exchanged?
Yes, I think that's the case. Yes, yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
Because even now, I'm up to, I think, 4,000 friends on Facebook or something. When somebody comes in, now I've gotten to the point I'll actually look where it says about to see what they've posted, and some of them have some peripheral information. And I'll say, come on the show or tell me more about it. And some of them do, and some of them you never hear from again. I don't know, but I would say, like with the Facebook people, most of them I've got some rock and roll people, a couple of wrestling groups, because I had a girlfriend who was a wrestler, and mainly paranormal and UFOs. Oh, and horror films. So it's a pretty mixed bag. But there seem to be, there are females. There are women in there now, and maybe they're just not running the organizations or something.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. Another voice that dissented from what I thought was the case.
Well, here's another interesting thing. Jim Moseley used to say, "Why is it that there are no Afro-Americans in the UFO field?" Well, not only are there Afro-Americans involved in it, they have their own UFO groups.
And they've got their own UFO tradition.
Yes, and they've got more members than we do. Yes, yeah. There's one group that's up in Harlem, and they have all their stuff posted on YouTube, and they have meetings, I don't know, once or twice a year, and they seem to have their own versions of us.
Yes, which is it? I mean, I look in the index of Jerry Clark's massive UFO encyclopedia, which is an extraordinary reference work for Louis Farrakhan.
Yeah.
No reference.
Yeah.
Louis Farrakhan is the most well-known UFO abductee in the world. So I don't think he uses that phrase. But
Muhammad Ali, of course, too. He's a follower of the Elijah Muhammad, right? And part of he gave me, when I first met him, he gave me a copy of the book Elijah Muhammad Speaks, and there's a whole chapter in there, what they call the wheel within a wheel. Yes. They think that there's a giant mothership up there that's, well, at first it was going to just save the black people, but now it looks like it's gotten a little bit more interracial as they've gotten along or something. But yeah, it's part of their belief system, so they don't have to talk about it, because it's like going to church. You don't talk about Ezekiel every week when you're there.
So I mean, this is all something that really I would really love to know a lot more about, and I
have something to contribute there. I have what I consider to be a
broader spectrum of interests that are interrelated. I mean, I'm very involved in the broader parapsychology community, very involved in the occult community, very involved in the science fiction community, as well as ufology. And I see them as part of a spectrum. And I mean, I will comment briefly that the Moorish Science Church, which is also an offspring of the same outfit that the Nation of Islam comes out of, is ufology in a broad sense has been incorporated into their fundamental belief system, so that I have crossover members, is not really the right word for it, associates from that community that are and they are notably younger. They're probably baby boomers, but on the other end of the baby boom. But in all of these areas, with the single exception of science fiction, they're all aging. They all seem to have been part of the baby boom. And there was a huge upsurge of interest beginning in the case of ufology in the early 1960s, but cresting in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and continuing to go, but it's the same people, or those people and extensions of it, that is, married into the community, whatever.
So you would tend to assume that in fact it is a generational thing, that the teen ufology is not reproducing itself.
No, and I think that's true of these other areas as well, with the single exception of science fiction. They're not aging, they have a new generation, and it's larger, much larger. It's become, in fact, too large for my taste. It's become sort of a commercial institution, whereas these other areas, ufology and occult, and even parapsychology, which is considered, borderline normal academic interest, it's the same guys that were around in the 1960s and 70s as undergraduates who were experimenting around, that are senior scientists now, but they're still in that same fringe community, and there aren't any follow-ups. The closest thing to follow-ups are people that are younger but who take a more science fiction approach. Example, the interest in the work of Philip K. Dick and Gnosticism, which is kind of a crossover interest. And I don't think that, to the extent that you get younger people at all, that if there's anything like that, all male